Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to oppose the Crown Minerals Amendment Act 2013 Amendment Bill. Mr Speaker, because we're sitting under urgency on a Saturday, I've got babysitting duties and had to bring my kids to Parliament. They're in the parents' room at the moment. And coming down to the chamber, I was thinking, why is it important to oppose this bill going through urgency? And Mr Speaker, it's not a cliche, but it's because of my kids. Because as a parent, the best moments I believe you can have as a Kiwi parent is playing with your kids on the beach. It's such an iconic Kiwi experience. And by George, we've got some amazing beaches around this country. And I don't want to see that special experience destroyed for New Zealanders, because I know this afternoon thousands of Kiwis are going on the beaches to draw a line in the sand against this government's deep-sea drilling agenda, Mr Speaker. Hundreds of New Zealanders are joining hands across the beach, about a dozen cities I understand. I'm going to be there with my children because we're drawing a line in the sand. We're saying if the government can't guarantee they can't deal with a spill, if the government can't guarantee they can't avoid a catastrophic deep-sea spill, we shouldn't be doing it. Because what we know is this government is opening up huge acreage. 189,000 square kilometres was opened up a fortnight ago for tender, mostly deep-sea oil drilling permits. What we know is the deeper you go, the deeper you drill, the risks are magnified. The industry themselves say they operate at the frontiers of technology, geology, geography. Just last week, Lord Brown, the former chair of BP, said the risks for deep-sea oil drilling are too high. And that's why I'm opposing this bill, because what this bill does, through a bad, ridiculous, embarrassing process, through a shocking, shoddy parliamentary process, is just encouraging greater speculation in the industry. It's inviting cowboys to come down to New Zealand and risk our environment, risk our beaches. And, Mr Speaker, the risks are too high, yet the government's trying to clamp down on protests. Mr Speaker, a couple of years ago when the Rena spill occurred, those 350 tonnes of oil, what we saw was New Zealand woefully unprepared to deal with the spill. Yet the government still only nominated their oil spill capacity to be 5,500 tonnes. Yet what we know is a deep-sea well blowout could release 600,000 tonnes. In America, they had 40,000 people working on the spill. We've got 400 trained responders. In America, they had 1,000 vessels. In New Zealand, we've got 3 dinghies. In America, they had everything in place, but it was still catastrophic and cost $40 billion. Yet this government says the penalties, the maximum penalties, are only $10 million. And a company only has to have insurance of $30 million, Mr Speaker. The government can't guarantee we won't see a spill. The government isn't prepared, isn't protecting the taxpayer from liability. So that's why we're opposing this bill, this ridiculous bill that just shows the minister's incompetence. Because here we are, a matter of weeks after the Crown Minerals Act Amendment Bill was passed, before it's even come into effect, the government's having to modify it to fix up the mistakes. But it's worse than that, because through urgency, they're trying to slip in some sneaky changes to benefit their mates in the oil industry, because they've got no vision for this economy. They'd rather gamble with our environment, gamble with our fishing industry, gamble with our tourism industry, gamble with that important Kiwi experience to enjoy a beach with your kids. They're going to gamble with that to support their mates, because they've got no vision. But there's a better way, Mr Chair, Mr Speaker. We should be encouraging clean energy, manufacturing jobs, a smart, innovative economy. But the government's not doing that. They're putting all the eggs in this basket. And what you see is them cutting special deals. And that's why, under urgency, they're amending legislation which still hasn't come into effect, with no select committee process, no regulatory impact statement, in fact no actual answers in the committee stage. The only parliamentary scrutiny, the only scrutiny our country has, is the ability to question the minister and his officials, and yet the minister refused to take a single call, or any national member take a single call in the committee stage. Mr Speaker, this is lawmaking quite simply at its worst, but what we're gambling with is our environment and our economy, because what the substantive amendments contained in this amendment bill do is encourage speculation, because now, to get a permit, once this law is passed and signed into law, companies to apply successfully for a permit don't have to have the financial capability to be able to do the work they're promising to do. Let's say that again. You don't have to have the financial capability to do the work you're promising to do. Apologies, Mr. Speaker. This is deeply worrying because what we're doing is encouraging speculation into the industry. The government's oil drilling agenda has been so woefully unsuccessful, with Petrobras leaving, Apache leaving, Anadarko delaying all their work. They're trying to look as if they're busy by encouraging a proliferation of small players to speculate in the industry because the plan has just been so unsuccessful. The second point is what we're seeing. Well, Mr Brownlee, I'm quite happy to have taken a strong stance along with the majority of New Zealanders. Remember, 99% of Kiwis in the regulation submissions said it should be a prohibited activity because you can't guarantee it.
Order, order, order.
And Mr Speaker, what we're seeing is this government making it easier to get a deep-sea oil permit without the technical capability. Let's say that again. You don't have to have experience to know how to drill a well to get a deep-sea oil permit under national.
Order.
And what we see is this government saying, we saw John Key a month ago saying they're not going to invite cowboys down to New Zealand. This is exactly what this legislation rammed through under urgency is. It's about getting cowboys come down to New Zealand to speculate. We don't want people learning how to drill on the job. We don't want people learning how to drill on the job. The government's gambling with our economy, gambling with our environment. It's not on, Mr Speaker, because there are better ways forward. Just lastly, what we see is Clause 14 being sneaked through by Minister Bridges. So originally, Parliament saw the traditional Bill of Rights and Select Committee processes bypassed through the introduction of a supplementary order paper. Now the government is using urgency to amend something that had been scrutinised.
Order. I have members interjecting on each other who don't have the floor. If they want to call, that's fine. They can do it later on, but they know it's out of order, and it's discourteous to the member who's trying to speak. Courtesy is contagious, members. I call the honourable member Gareth Hughes.
Mr Speaker. Let's hope the national members can take a call and talk about the substance so they can talk about why they're weakening our permit rules, why they're weakening our regulations, why they're risking and gambling with our environment. But the important breach of human rights, and I believe international law, is the Clause 14 they're sneaking through under urgency, something that had no scrutiny because they snuck it through an amendment to the previous legislation. This is not on. Eminent legal professors have said that to Mr Speaker. What they're doing is extending their 5 new criminal provisions, the so-called Anadarko amendment, introduced through an amendment, out into the continental shelf. This is interesting because New Zealand doesn't actually have jurisdiction over the continental shelf. You look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade website, look at the Ministry of the Environment website, look at the conflicts wrecking China, Japan, the Arctic countries who are debating this very issue at the moment. But the government's quite prepared to unilaterally run ahead and say, oh, sure, we don't have jurisdiction, but we're going to apply laws that only relate to the oil industry, that only relate to protest, because they're so scared of protest. They're sending the message that protest is effective. It's laying down a challenge to protesters that the industry is scared of the work that you're doing, that they're prepared to ram roughshod over New Zealanders' human right. The honourable tradition which former Prime Minister Geoffrey Palmer, Peter Williams QC, Dayman Salmon, New Zealander of the Year, says was such a fundamental part of New Zealand and such an honourable tradition, they're ramming through and extending these egregious powers over an extended 1.7 million square kilometres over the continental shelf. It's deeply worrying because it's a breach of human rights. It's deeply worrying because it's going to have international political, geopolitical ramifications. New Zealand's unilaterally running ahead, extending its jurisdiction, and what we're seeing is all in support of the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, who only a fortnight ago said they're going to be applying for a permit where else but the continental shelf. Mr Speaker, this is a worrying precedent we're seeing under this government. We're seeing laws being made for Hollywood. We're seeing laws being made for casinos. We're seeing laws being made for the industry, by the industry. This is not on. It's not what Kiwis expect. This government's got tens of millions of dollars in subsidies, pages and pages of tax exemptions, free research support, free support from officials, legislation being passed for them. They even call out the Navy to support Petrobras and the oil industry. This government's sending a very clear message. Drill, baby, drill. New Zealand is open. If you're a foreign offshore oil company, what about the wind industry? What about the manufacturing industry? What about the geothermal industry? This government is sending the message it's an unlevel playing field. They're going to subsidise, support, do anything they can to support one particular industry because they've got no vision. They'd rather risk our environment, gamble that someone will find something somewhere, And that's our path to prosperity. It's not because we've got the fourth lowest royalty rate in the world. We know from Taranaki we're going to see hardly any jobs. What we know is we're going to see all the profits. Well, the government's own report says 90% of the profits are going to flow offshore. Hardly any jobs, hardly any taxes, hardly any royalties. Profits flowing offshore, yet risking our environment. Why doesn't the government listen to the PricewaterhouseCoopers report that said there's a $22 billion clean energy opportunity? Why don't they listen to the Pure Advantage report that says there's a $6 trillion clean tech industry we could be getting a slice of? But no, this government would rather keep its head in the sand, bend over backwards for the world's disturbing trend, lawmaking at its worst, Mr Chair. There's a better way. The Green Party's offering solutions to make New Zealand a richer place and enhance those beautiful beach experiences for Kiwi families.
I call the Honourable Member for Seta Sam Lotu Ainga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I